city of art par excellence. From the sky, its monuments stand out like gems in the old part of the city. Museums, churches, and palaces, works of art in their own right, house an artistic heritage that has no equal in Italy or anywhere else in the world. But like all heritages, it must be safeguarded against the ravages of time and needs to be restored if damaged in natural disasters. There can be no more eloquent images than these to introduce 25 years of restoration work in Florence. Dramatic moments of November 4th, 1966. The last time the Arno River broke its banks. In just a few hours, the city was flooded with water, mud, and oil. That disastrous event was the beginning of an exciting story of restoration that we have followed year by year ever since. The most famous victim of the 1966 disaster was Cimabue's crucifix. When the disaster struck, the painting was hanging in the refectory of Santa Croce, where floodwaters reached a height of some 5 meters. Within the space of a few minutes, the precious artwork suffered severe damage. Sections of the face and body of Christ peeled off. A few days later, after the water receded, Cimabue's masterpiece was taken to the restoration workshop, as if retracing the path taken 700 years earlier when the crucifix was first carried through the streets of Florence. The wood support was so impregnated with water that the restorers had to remove the paint layer. All that was left of the painting was transferred to a temporary support. Seven centuries after the artist's hand had completed an integrated work of art, the painting and the cross were separated. The wood still carried the outline of the painting. The cross and the painting were restored separately and then joined together again. Another masterpiece, badly damaged by the 1966 floodwaters, was Donatello's Magdalene, one of the Florentine sculptor's last and most extraordinary works. Restoration work gave surprising results. The first thing to do in the workshop the day after the flood was to clean off the mud and oil which had impregnated the wooden statue when the floodwaters swirled into the baptistry. Almost by chance, during the cleaning process, traces of the original gilding came to light. A discovery which has considerably increased the statue's value, giving it a position of prime importance in Donatello's work and in the overall Renaissance scenario. For the people of Florence who lived through those terrible days of the flood, the Magdalene became the symbol of the city's rebirth, just as the irreparable damage to Cimabue's crucifix symbolizes the destruction wreaked by the water. The modern approach to restoration applies not only to artworks damaged by natural disasters or in times of war, but also represents another chapter in the very history of art restoration. Another step in the evolution of restoration methods and techniques. This Madonna offers an example of this new approach. In the course of centuries, it had been retouched for aesthetic and religious reasons, never because it was damaged. During the partial removal of the various superimposed layers, it became a work which almost seems to belong to an avant-garde 20th century artist. Cleaning is the first step in the restoration of a painting. Today, it is generally believed that no artwork can be returned to the state it was in when it left the artist's studio. Paints are changed by chemical modification, by exposure to the light, by various elements in the air, and in the majority of cases by irresponsible restoration work. The best way to understand the restorer's job is to follow, step by step, work carried out on a damaged painting. We followed some of the steps involved in restoring a painting of St. James by Lorenzo Monaco. First, the painting is covered with layers of rice paper, a very strong elastic material, to stop the paintwork flaking or moving. Then, a layer of plaster and glue is applied. And finally, a thin sheet of gauze. As far as the wooden support is concerned, there are two possibilities. Either to reinforce it or to replace it. In this case, only the second solution is viable, and so the original wood is gradually eliminated. The painting is turned over and clamped to the work table, and a long and unavoidable process of destruction starts. A high-speed power plane operating at about 15,000 revs a minute is used to reduce vibration to an absolute minimum. This phase becomes increasingly more difficult as the plane approaches the last thin layer of wood that supports the precious painting. The risks involved in removing the last parts of the support are evaluated on the basis of the condition of the wood and of the first layer of the painting, a diaphragm only a few millimeters thick. Surgical instruments are used for this delicate work, and often progress is studied through a microscope. The most exciting and unique moment of the operation is when the layers of the support have been completely removed. The back of the painting is revealed as if it had been painted on a transparent support. It is at this moment that the layer of paint is at its most vulnerable. The next phase concerns the actual surface of the painting, cutting away the layers of rice paper. These are tense, crucial, anxious moments for even the most expert restorers. Finally, the head of St. James appears. The most dangerous step has been completed. The painting is safe. It will not be given a new support right away. The work that was imperative to guarantee the painting's survival has now been carried out. Now, let's take a look at the procedure for restoring a painting on canvas. If, as happens frequently, the canvas is damaged or weakened, a new canvas must be glued onto the back of the original one by using an adhesive substance that impregnates the weave of both surfaces. The new canvas is stretched on a frame mounted on the floor. The painting is wrapped around a large wooden roller. The glue is spread simultaneously on the new and the old canvases. And then, slowly, the painting is unrolled onto its new support. Special irons are used to make sure that the old canvas is glued evenly onto the new one. As is the case with paintings on wood, before the support was restored, the painted surface had to be protected with sheets of rice paper. Now that this recanvassing phase is finished, the rice paper can be removed. Slowly, the painting reappears, a glorification of the Madonna with saints. The work of 17th century painter Jacopo Chimenti, known as the painter from Empoli. Cleaning restores the painting's original splendor. Now that it has received a new support, it will undergo the various other restoration phases that will guarantee it a long life. The development of today's restoration methods has naturally been influenced by scientific and technological innovations. One example of this is the preservation work carried out on Ghirlandaio's frescoes in the church of Santa Maria Novella. The frescoes had contracted a disease caused by a fungus and were being progressively and inexorably dissolved. Research carried out by the Florence University's Institute of Organic Chemistry and Microbiology, together with a series of laboratory tests, made it possible to apply an appropriate fungicide. In the history of Florentine painting, the fresco represented for several centuries the height of artistic expression. It was in Florence and in Tuscany that this particular kind of wall painting was perfected. The name itself defines the method. The artist works directly on a freshly plastered section of a wall before it dries. Generally, frescoes are quite strong and long-lasting, but they do have a few mortal enemies, such as humidity, that can impregnate the plaster and cause it to flake. Furthermore, humidity in the form of rising damp carries with it several substances like salts and nitrates. In some cases, these come from the remains of human bodies, which, at one time, used to be buried in churches. Santa Maria Novella was one of many ancient burial places in Florence. Long excavation works have been carried out to remove the remains found in the tombs. But, also following the 1966 flood, the frescoes in the cloisters and in the so-called Spaniards' Chapel were in danger of complete destruction. Humidity from below the ground was slowly rising higher and higher. To stop the humidity advancing any further, air ducts were drilled inside the walls. Strong currents of hot air were then circulated through them and released on the outside, so that they would not affect environmental conditions within the chapel. These currents of warm air were created by ventilators heated with propane gas. If this rescue operation had not taken place, today the walls and ceiling of the Spaniards' Chapel would be covered in mold and strangely colored blotches that would have obliterated the frescoes. Another fresco which has been restored is the Annunciation by Jacopo da Pontormo in the church of Santa Felicita. Thanks to careful cleaning and the removal of repainted sections, Colors were restored to their original splendor in the fresco, which is one of the most sublime expressions of Florentine mannerism. From Santa Felicita, we move on to the Badia Fiorentina. In 1967, general restoration works brought to light a splendid little fresco in the abbey. For unknown reasons, the niche, painted by Taddeo Gaddi, had been walled up. In order to save the fresco, it had to be removed from the wall. But how can a fresco be taken off a wall without damaging the painting itself? We were able to film this extraordinary operation, which consisted in removing the fresco from the wall using the stacco, or detaching method. The first step is to seal off those sections of the painting that show signs of flaking and clean off all surface dirt so that the adhesive will stick evenly all over. Then the fresco is faced with several layers of canvas, which will prevent the painting disintegrating when it is lifted off the wall. Here, the operation is in its final stages. When the facing material is dry, the upper layer of plaster is detached, separating the fresco from the wall. Lifting off the painting and the plaster reveals the fresco's preliminary design traced on the wall, the Sinopia. Sinopias open a new chapter in art history. In fact, Sinopias, as the preliminary drawing for a fresco was called, were always sketched by the artist personally, using reddish-brown pigment, while his apprentices often helped with the actual painting of the fresco. This central section of a tabernacle with the Madonna and Child and Saints, painted by Niccolò di Pietro Gerini, illustrates the importance of the Sinopia. The fresco was taken off the wall to save it from the ravages of rising damp. Removal of the painting revealed the Sinopia. There are several noticeable differences between the preliminary sketch and the completed fresco. For example, the hands of the Madonna, which hold the Child. The crossed hands of the angel, which in the Sinopia were joined in prayer. And in the fresco, St. John's cross is replaced by a roll of parchment. The use of X-rays is of fundamental importance in the identification of paintings and their attribution to a given painter. X-rays of a famous self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci revealed that, in fact, the painting was a fake. Beneath the portrait, there was a Mary Magdalene painted over 50 years after Leonardo's death. But let's get back to frescoes. This one was lifted off with the stacco method. On the back, there is still the layer of plaster which fixed it to the wall. In order to remove all elements that might destroy the substance of the painting, it must be separated from the original plaster. And this is done with an electric milling wheel. In some cases, this operation must be continued until it is possible to see the painting from behind as if it were a mirror image. After it has been freed from its original situation, the layer of paintwork is applied to a new support with properties that will guarantee it conservation in the course of time. After this operation is finished, other steps must be carried out before the painting itself is restored. Hot water is used to dissolve the glue which held the protective layers of canvas against the picture when it was lifted off the wall. Little by little, the fresco reappears. The work in question is the 15th century Saint Christine and episodes from her life by Bici di Lorenzo. This huge fresco on the floor is The Tree of Life by Taddeo Gaddi. It comes from the Church of Santa Croce. Incredible though it may seem, even works this big can be lifted off a wall in one piece. We end our journey through 25 years of restoration works in Florence with an authentic masterpiece, an acknowledged milestone in art history. In the Church of Santa Maria del Carmine, at the end of the right arm of the cross, lies the famous Brancacci Chapel. The frescoes were begun by Masaccio and Masolino in the 3rd decade of the 15th century. 50 years later, Filippino Lippi was commissioned to complete the cycle left unfinished by his predecessors. More than 500 years later, the frescoes of these 3 great painters, illustrating episodes from the life of St. Peter, were in miserable condition. The faded colors, incomplete restoration works, mold, and flaking had dulled the scenes, destroying their radiant richness. Before any restoration program was attempted, the frescoes were given a general checkup. Each section of the complex of paintings was photographed with direct and slanting lighting. Then an ultraviolet fluorescent scan was used to determine the state of preservation and to locate extraneous paint. A photogrammetry study pinpointed and identified deformations within the frescoes, which were then transformed into a graphic model. In an area where the wall was cracked, laser photography was used. This high-precision technique can pick out the smallest deformation and measures movement that has taken place within the structure of the fresco. Finally, infrared reflectographic analysis was used for the first time on frescoed walls. This made it possible to see through the layers of dirt and determine the fresco's original pigmentation. The results of all these preliminary studies were collected in a data bank, which was to be progressively updated throughout the restoration process. Digital pictures and elaborated graphics offer an accurate means of control. An important contribution to the restoration process was made by the discovery, behind the Baroque altar, of 2 painted medallions. One probably by Masaccio, the other by Masolino. These 2 medallions offered a means of determining the original chromatic composition, since their colors had not been affected by the course of time. And so, cleaning of the frescoes started with scenes closest to those in the medallions. A study of the expulsion from Eden by Masaccio had surprising results. The leaves painted on the naked bodies of Adam and Eve were not original, but the mark of censorship, discreet camouflage probably applied in the 17th century. By removing the leaves from Masaccio's fresco and from Masolino's Original Sin, the figures of Adam and Eve were restored to their original state, just as the two great artists had conceived them. Slowly and meticulously, all the scenes in the Brancacci Chapel reacquired their original luminescence. In 1990, after missing areas had been filled in, the restoration process, which had lasted more than 5 years, could be considered concluded. One of the highest artistic expressions of all time had been reborn. Our restoration story has also come to an end, but there is certainly no end to the work of Florentine restorers. The city's immense artistic heritage is constantly demanding their patient attention, just as respect and care are demanded of those who come to see that heritage.